So let's talk veg, shall we? From cauliflowers to broccoli, strawberries to asparagus. Earlier today, the Devon MP Luke Pollard raised the issue of how our farmers and growers will cope if the seasonal migrant workers, on which many of them rely, won't be available because of COVID-19 restrictions. Well, the government says it wants the British workforce to step up and fill that gap. Let's talk to Luke. How big a concern is this, Luke?
Well, for those people that work in farming, it is a pretty big concern. We need normally to have about 80,000 seasonal agricultural workers working on our fields across the country. That's especially important in places like the southwest and the east of England in particular. But we know that the new policy the government's introduced is only going to allow 10,000 seasonal agricultural workers into Britain this year. And we know that the virus is making it harder to get workers. And this creates a bit of a problem. And it's not just me that's raising it on behalf of, in my role as Shadow Environment Secretary. Devon MPs like Neil Parish and Tiverton and Honiton, who is a Tory, have been raising it as well, because we need to make sure that we have the people to help plant and pick the crops in our field to ensure that we have an uninterrupted supply of food, because otherwise we'll be having empty shelves in the future if we don't have this food properly planted and properly picked.
So is this a Brexit issue or is this a coronavirus issue?
Oh, well, it's one of those joys that combines both of them, which makes debate about this very, very difficult because people have very strong opinions on it. The reality where we are at the moment is if we don't have more people in our fields, and that's not just sometimes the stereotypical impression of fruit pickers of being low skilled and low paid, but there's many high skilled trained roles in this, operating heavy agricultural machinery, supporting this vital industry. If we don't have those people working in our fields, we simply will be in a situation where the crops, if they are planted, many will be rotting in the fields. And this isn't the first time this has happened. Towards the end of last year, a shortage of workers in our rural communities actually led to many crops rotting in the field. But because food is, at long last, further up the political agenda because of the virus and because of problems getting food available, then we can now have a proper debate about the labour requirements for farming. And of course, if we had more Brits wanting to do it, this probably wouldn't be as big a problem. But we know that getting British workers to work in fields in these agricultural roles, pickers and planters in particular, is quite a challenge. I'd love to see more of it, but we know we're not going to be able to backfill that overnight. So that's why we need to have a system that keeps encouraging those trained seasonal agricultural workers that come back year after year after year, often to the same farms, picking the same crops to keep that food supply uninterrupted. And some people regard this as highly political. I regard this as an absolute necessity. MPs from all parties need to start paying more attention to where food comes from and valuing the people that work in those sectors much more than they have before. And I hope that this contribution will get us further towards that place. OK, look, stay with us. We may well come back to you on this one. I know George Eustace, the Environment Secretary, has been saying, to some extent, backing what you're saying. We need to mobilise the British workforce to fill that gap and make sure our excellent fruit and vegetables are on people's plates over the summer months. Let's talk to Jack Ward. Jack is from the British Growers Association. Jack, do you recognise this concerning picture that Luke Pollard is mentioning? We could see crops rotting in the fields because there aren't enough people to pick them?
Yeah, I think Luke summed it up extremely well. I think, the point to make, and Luke made this point in his opening remarks, is that we're getting to that point in the year when the UK consumer looks to the UK growers to supply them with a very, very substantial amount of fresh fruit and fresh produce. And what's going in the ground now will ensure that we have got continuity of supply, not just through the summer, but right into next winter and beyond. So it is really critical. And as Luke says, historically, we have relied on seasonal workers coming in from Bulgaria and from Romania. The introduction of the new immigration thinking, which would have applied from the beginning of January next year, would have made life very much more difficult. But obviously, in some ways, that problem has been brought forward by the whole coronavirus issue. And now, we're in a very serious situation of how to find enough people to harvest our crops, which is going to feed the country for the next 6 to 9 months.
Well, here's your opportunity, Jack. Tell us why it is that people who perhaps have found themselves, perhaps they're self-employed and can't work elsewhere at the moment, why should they be stepping forward to come and help in the fields?
Well, it's a great opportunity for anybody that likes a bit of outdoor life. It's a great opportunity. You can earn a fair amount of money if you work hard. And it's going to play a very important part in making sure that through the summer and into the autumn, when people go into our retail outlets, there is the choice and selection of fruit and vegetables that they would expect to see.
Could we, if that doesn't happen, be looking at shortages?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is really very serious indeed. We're all set to start the asparagus harvest. That's probably one of the first crops that we start the spring-summer harvest season with. And a number of growers are looking at very, very significant shortfalls with a crop which, given a fair bit of weather over the next fortnight, we would expect to start harvesting in the middle of April. So, it is very important. We do have a gradual start into the season. Asparagus is probably the earliest crop. And we start to gear up heavily once we move into May, June with berries and salad crops. We'll reach peak requirement probably, mid-May, June, July, August, and then it starts to tail off in September. So, over the next sort of 6 weeks, we're hoping to be able to encourage lots and lots of people to come out and help make sure that these crops are harvested and they're available for consumers in the shops in the months ahead.
We've always been told in the past, haven't we, that British people won't do these jobs, which is why so many seasonal workers came into the country. Why do you think that is? Is it just not paid well enough?
No, I don't think it's that. I think if we look around, there has been...
It's hard work.
It's hard work, but we're looking at a situation where there's very, very small levels of unemployment. And generally, if you look at where the produce is grown, particularly up and down the East Coast and, some places in the Southwest, there are relatively low levels of unemployment and there are low levels of, population. And that hasn't helped the situation. Often where people are looking for work is not necessarily where the produce is being grown. But we're in a very different situation now. The world looks a very different place to the place it looked a fortnight ago.
Luke, let me just come back to you. You represent a Plymouth constituency. By definition, the work that we're talking about is largely not going to be in Plymouth. Presumably, you need people right on the doorstep of these farms to be coming forward.
Well, we do. I mean, and the answer with this one here will always be a mix of things. We both need the government to look again at seasonal agricultural workers. 10,000 is far too small a figure. But we also need people to recognise that jobs in agriculture in our rural communities are good jobs. And so we need both to attract in people from abroad, but we also need to have it as a career of choice locally.
But you can't attract people abroad from the moment. At the moment, you can't have them from abroad, even if you want them.
Well, as a key worker industry, there is ability to ensure that we can attract people that are key workers. Yes, it's difficult and it's complicated, but there are ways of doing so. The thing we have to realise is the government's classified people that work in food as key workers. They have, at long last, started to understand just how critically important this area is. Because, frankly, I think this area has been neglected by government for quite some time as just put in the difficult-to-touch immigration box. Let's not talk about it because it adds to our immigration total.
But let me just get this clear. Are you saying then, even now, we could still be getting workers in from, I don't know, Poland, the Czech Republic, whatever, to come to this country for this year's crop? Is that okay?
Well, I think we need to find ways of recognising how is the crop going to be planted and how is it going to be picked properly. Now, that will create some very difficult challenges for government. And the reason I'm raising this now is not because the answer is staring us in the face and is an easy one for us to do, but because it's difficult and complicated. And it will require government to look at it again to go, OK, we will need more people working in the fields. How are we going to be able to resource that? Where will they come from? That means looking again at the immigration policy, looking again at the crisis response to the virus, and starting to make working in our agricultural settings a career of choice for more homegrown talents.
As it has been for so many years. For the moment, Luke, much appreciated. Thank you. Luke Pollard, who is Shadow Environment Secretary, is also a Devon MP, and Jack Ward from the British Growers Association.